turn the music off, sorry.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this evening's session of Seminary of the Third Age, which continues our exploration of the challenges of being progressive in the church today. My name is David McCurdy. I have the pleasure of chairing the Progressive Christianity Network here in South Australia. And a special welcome to those who will be viewing this via Zoom later. I'd like to begin by reminding you that we meet on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, and we pay our respects to their elders, past and present. In doing so, we recognise their role as the original occupants of this place, their cultural heritage, and their spiritual connection with country, dating back more than 40,000 years. And we also extend that respect to other First Nations people, as together they seek to have accepted and implemented the Uluru Statement from the Heart. First, some housekeeping matters. If you've got a mobile phone that's turned on, please turn it off. If you need to use the toilets, they're on either side of the foyer. And following tonight's presentation, you're welcome to stay on for a further conversation over tea, coffee, wine and nibbles. Our speaker will have the floor for 40 minutes or so, after which there will be an opportunity for people to comment or ask a question. And please remember to use the handheld mic for that. It's now my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, the Reverend Peter McDonald. After completing his theological studies at Flinders University in 1999, Peter served for 6 years as the minister at Renmark Uniting Church. Since 2006, he has worked for Uniting Communities, for most of the time as executive manager of its advocacy unit. He's currently seconded to the Centre for Social Impact at Flinders University, where he works 3 days a week. And there he is investigating the impact of artificial intelligence and data on disadvantaged people. And we'll be hearing a bit more about that tonight, I think. Peter is also chair of the Presbytery of Southern Australia, the Uniting Church Presbytery. He's a volunteer for South Australian Sea Rescue Squadron, and he's a keen gardener with over 20 fruit trees in his backyard. That's pretty impressive. In addition to his theological qualifications, he also has an MBA from the University of Adelaide and a certificate in risk and corporate governance from the Governance Institute of Australia. Please join me in welcoming Peter to the lectern.
Good evening, everyone. It's good to see you here this evening. What I thought I would do is just paint sort of 3 or 4 areas and then pull up before 30 minutes. And then with you together, if we want to dive into one of these topics more deeply, then that floats my boat. So that's my approach to how I would think about this evening. I always start though, if we can get our first slide up.
No, the clicker's right there on
I get to do it myself.
So it's all yours, Peter.
Sorry, I didn't realise. I always start though by acknowledging that I am a father to 2 daughters. I'm a son to my dad who's got dementia. Dad's in dementia, mum's not well, so I am playing more of a carer role than I have in the past now. So mum usually looks after dad, but mum's not as well as this. This is a photo, of my 2 daughters. The second daughter, Amelia, does costume design. So here we are in Sydney singing Hamilton the musical mid-COVID. We managed to, I think it was just as the COVID was winding up. Anyway, so it's important for me to recognise my eldest now works in Canberra. She works for the federal government in Canberra, Miranda. My Amelia is still at home doing costume design with Flinders and TAFE, so she knows how to make costumes. She can turn people into a Pikachu or whatever it is that they want to do. Yes, I'm happily married to Catherine. That's Catherine's sister. Catherine's an identical twin. It so happens in that photo I'm standing next to her sister, not next to my wife. Anyway, there we go. I think it's important. It's important for me to recognise my family, and also that the land we're on is the land of the Kaurna people. And I commend people, if they haven't already, I'm sure you have, to take the time to have a read of the Uluru Statement. We were just having a little chat before we started about how at United Communities we're commending people to read the Uluru Statement as an invitation. It's an invitation, really. It's an invitation to deepen a relationship, and so there we go. Okay, so yes, now I can go like this. So yeah, they're the roles that we've had before. So I thought that this is where the sort of areas that I'm going to pick up on is what are the largest, if we're going to learn from these church agencies, and maybe what might the agencies even learn from the church and what's going on there, I thought I would picture this way. I thought I'd start out by saying, what are the three biggest forces that I think run on the agencies, and I'll have a picture a little bit about that. And I think that they have profoundly changed the agencies over the last, 30 years, let's say. Then we'll have a bit of a chat about what can we learn, and then that last part is the advocacy public policy piece. I'll jump into artificial intelligence and a little bit about that right at the end as we go. So you take a moment to think, before I flick the button, what would you pick as the three most influential, maybe influential would be a better word than largest, influential forces on the agencies that have shaped them over time? I think here are the three. I think the contracting out of services from the state is a significant change. From Whitlam, if we go all the way back to Whitlam, where Whitlam's making decisions that the state is going to take responsibility for services that never previously existed. There's a whole series of things that occur in his time, whether that's, we see it in the form of Murray Mudge, aged care. It being a big part of the mission at that time was a part of the Whitlam era. The growth of the social services in our community, social services that didn't exist, really does start to shape the then Methodist mission and the agencies that are there. That continues. You can go forward through successive both Conservative and Labor governments and see places where both sides of politics have contracted church agencies work that previously was always seen as part of the state government or federal government service. Those services have been over many years have really grown the agencies. I think it's probably one of the most significant forces that is around that. It means that the agencies have grown. They have grown incredibly. Both here in South Australia and around Australia, and probably around the world if we went and had a look at it. I reckon the second thing that is probably the most influential big things is the way that decisions get made in organisations. So, the risk, people will call it risk and governance. How the Uniting Church, or its predecessors, the Methodists, in the case of the agencies, I should acknowledge my friend here, Les Underwood. Les is from one of Les, I'm good friends with Les, and I'm glad he's with us today. And he's at Uniting SA, and I'm sure Les will jump in at some point about this. I think the topic of governance, and that is, in my reading of our history, these agencies there was a decision point where they decided, are we going to use the model the Baptists run, where you have to be Baptist to be on the board? Or are we going to run a model where we're going to value the goodwill of people who are not Uniting Church members and include them in the leadership of the organisations? Well before my time, that decision has been made. That was made years ago. The Methodists and subsequent Uniting Church has been very clear about including people of goodwill, people who are not Uniting Church members, And it's one of the things that I think makes us quite different from the Baptists, because the Baptists are very clear. You want to come on this board, you've got to be signed up member. So our tradition has been profoundly shaped by that. It means that our agencies have, if there's a pressure around the separation between the model that we'd had in the past and what's going on now, it's one of the issues is that our boards are not run by Uniting Church people. We're not here to serve Uniting Church people. We're here to serve all people of goodwill, and we include those people in our employment, our workforce, and also in the governance of the organisations. It's profound. It does profoundly shape how the agencies think about themselves. On the other side of that is, some of you will remember, I don't know, I couldn't remember the year, it's probably about 10 years ago, the Synod had this deep and long conversation about risk. Now, risk is one of a variety of, let's call it tools or metaphors or through which you can look at these agencies. But for some reason, a colleague, and this, in a way, I think it was driven by the Synod, brought to the table, we've got to manage this risk that the agencies are running. And so then the language, a number of things fell out of that. One of them was we were no longer, I'm still using the language of agencies. In a way, I've got to change my language. We're meant to be organisations in association with the Uniting Church, I think is the proper term now. Les is nodding, I've got the term right. So what's going on there? Well, the Uniting Church has made a decision that these then agencies constituted a risk. You need to manage that risk. There's some tools for doing it. One is to force a separation, to make sure there's distance between the two. I mean, Peter's the grand irony, like I completely thought it was ridiculous, that this whole discussion is completely ridiculous, because the fundamental risk that you're managing is reputation. And it doesn't matter, my good colleague here at Port Adelaide, it doesn't matter how much distance in terms of governance and law that you might put between an agency and the Synod office or the Uniting Church, the fundamental risk is reputation. And so it doesn't matter what name, we changed our names to Uniting Communities, you're Uniting Care, it doesn't matter what we call ourselves, if all shit hits the fan in either the Synod or the agencies, but let's just say it's in the agencies at the moment, because of reputation, they're going to look at the Synod and say, why aren't you people managing these agencies? You actually can't get rid of the relationship. We've attempted to get rid of the relationship because of risk management. I think it's hilarious. It's just, I don't think it works. But it is the model that we have now, and it means it profoundly shapes the agencies, because the agencies go, well, okay, if you guys don't want the relationship, we're good with that. That's okay. We're fine by us. Because, we're growing. Your congregations are shrinking, but we're not. Our agencies of women growing like you wouldn't believe. We're huge. I think our turnover is 80 million this year. Some ridiculous number. I don't follow it like I used to anymore. Anyway, so there's a block of conversation we could have around risk and governance. Let me go to the last one, which is a bit more salient, and I'm bumping into this now as a carer for my parents. I think the thing that has really shaped our services and agencies is the thing called the market. In the past, if I'm inside the agency, there's a conversation about all the administration, people call it the shift away from block funding and the shift to market-based models. So let me give you an example. So in the past, Uniting Communities would be given an area that would say, in this part of South Australia, Uniting Communities, you can provide all the financial counselling. I will give the Port Adelaide model, saying, we'll give you disability services, and that's the area that you provide those services in. Now, if you live in that area, and you want to come to this service over here, no. In the block funding model, social service was provided by, so if I lived in Port Adelaide, and Port Adelaide had the contract for providing services if I have a child that's disabled or then I have to use Port Adelaide. In the new world we're in now, there's a thing called the NDIS, the National Disability Insurance Scheme, and this is an example. It's happening all over the place where actually people who experience disability or people who experience these things have said, that's not good enough. Where is the choice in this for us? There's no choice in this. You're forcing us to use, I actually don't get along with that mob. I want to use the Catholics, or I want to use Baptist care. In the block funding model, you were locked in, our communities were locked into very specific people. This market model means that I actually do get a choice about where my father goes around aged care. Now, Les will call out in a minute, he'll say, oh yeah, but Peter, you've spent 8 weeks trying to find a vacancy, which I have. It's been very difficult to get my parents into aged care. But I'm not locked into the provider that's down the road because of a block funding model. This thing probably has been, the influence of the market is probably the biggest change in the last 10 to 15 years that our agencies have seen. So we could have I've written a stirring, the Uniting Church ran a conference, I don't know, 5 or 8 years ago, about how terrible the market was. And so I'm landed as the right-wing nutjob because I ran the theme about going, actually, there's a place for the market in social services. And most people don't like the idea, but actually, if you think about it, do you want a choice in where you go to aged care? Do you want a choice about whether if you have a child who has a disability or you're looking after someone? Well, if you want a choice, then we need to use a market, not use a model where we just say, no, there's only one service provider and it's the state government. Anyway, so I'm very pro-market about this, and some people might be a bit surprised. So we could spend half an hour on that topic. So there we go. There's my pitch around forces for the agencies. I think the thing that what we might learn, so I think what the agencies helped me learn, and I think us learned, is we can learn our way through the sociological shifts that are happening in our community. Let me give you an example. I've got an example from history. Some of you will know that there was a service the Methodists ran called Kate Cox Babies Home. So for those of you who aren't familiar with this, so it starts in about the 1910s, 1920s. There is no social welfare. So you need to understand, Whitlam hasn't been around yet. There is no such thing as sort of a pension or a service around that. So Kate Cox, amazing woman in South Australia. She's absolutely worth reading her history about this. First female police officer, does a whole range of things. She spots that children are being abandoned. She starts taking children into her own home. She appeals to the Methodists for help, and they go, yeah, we're in this because this is really important. Now, this is a very thin version of her life and what happens. So it's ostensibly a home that looks after children that are either abandoned, or families are saying, we can't manage our 6 children for a while, we're going to put 2 in for a short period and then pull them out. So it got used in a variety of ways. So one of the things that's going on, now I'm not a great historian, somewhere in that period, it becomes clear, or the community starts to go, well, if you have a child that's born out of wedlock, then you are not a suitable mother to look after that child. So Kate Cox Babies Home does a lot of taking children that are born out of wedlock and then fosters them, gives them to good Methodist families of their day. So you think about that, and so here's the sociological shift I wanted you to point out, that I think we can capture and get. At the time, Kate Cox's home is doing an incredible important thing within its context and its time. Because there's no social welfare, children are being abandoned, and the Methodists went, this is really important. We're going to get in here and be involved. And there'd be other Protestant denominations that would not go there, but I think my reading of Methodism said, no, we're committed to these communities. We're going to be in this. Of course, you come forward to our period, and now we look back at that time, and of course, one of my roles was to listen to women who came to speak to us after the inquiry about the forced removal of children. So here's a huge sociological shift has gone on. Because, you know, in the 60s, 70s, huge change goes on, and how are we going to hold these things together? I feel privileged that I managed to listen to nearly 100 stories from women, mainly women, but some men, who talked to me about the way that the way that the society, it was the Methodists, but it was the way society put pressure on women to give up their children, that we stole their children. And there was this fine moment where this woman I was talking to, who was about my age, I'm 53, 54, so I'm about the right age range of the last sort of group of people that were going through that at the time. She said to me, you know, Peter, I've hated you people for all of my life because you have stolen my children. Yeah. And she said, and Peter, you've really listened to me. And, you know, yep. That's because Les said to me before this started, I rang Les the day this started because we had lots of calls coming in because we were on the front page of the Tiser when we announced that we were doing this. So we had a lot of phone calls. Les said to me, Peter, just listen. Just listen. You can't do anything about this. You just need to listen. So she said to me, you've listened and, you know, I really appreciate that. I really appreciate you've listened to me about this. And she said, I'm going to go on with the rest of my life, still hating you people, but gosh, you've done a fantastic job. Thank you for listening to me. I think why am I telling this story? Not just because it's about me, but because I think all of us are living in a world where there's these sociological shifts changing. Like if my two daughters were here, they are living in a very different world to the world that I grew up in. There's another significant sociological shift going on. I think we can learn from our agencies how do we hold with integrity both the stories of the Methodists from 1910s and Kate Cox's energy for looking after children, which doesn't neatly fit. I know it doesn't all neatly fit together in a package, but I do think we can learn from our agencies how we can be wise about acknowledging both our histories but also the presence of what's going on now. So if we want to do, I could give you a couple more stories about that, but I might just pause there. So I think we could have a great conversation about sociology and what's going on in our communities at the moment and how do we make sense of that now. All right. So yeah. So I had the handouts have gone out, I think, haven't they? Yeah, that's it. So I do 3 days a week at the Centre for Social Impact because I've been really involved with our advocacy for many years. So our advocacy has been about what's going on for disadvantaged people and from a systems point of view. So if you're going to help someone who's having a financial crisis, well then our agency has always said, well, if they're wrapped up in loans with radio rentals or AGC or you know, the loan sharks, then should not someone in our agency also be having a go at the legislative and policy end saying, what do we need to do to regulate payday lending? So United Communities has always had this sort of contribution, which is, yep, we'll help people. Of course, we're going to help people in financial crisis, but at the same time, we need someone doing the policy wonk stuff. So I've been in that policy wonk stuff for a while, and a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, we were asked, what are we missing? Is there something missing that we should be trying to address? And at the time, this is pre-Robodebt, but at the time, we were starting to notice that the way data was being used was not being fair. So let me try to give you the first example that I had with this was social workers often go out to, sometimes their task is to go and do an assessment on whether a family should be looking after their children properly, and if they're not doing that, they'll remove the child, yeah? So there's this assessment tool that gets used around that. And there was a bunch of people up in Queensland, some social workers up in Queensland, who realised what this tool was doing was leaving the children with the white middle-aged white male family, the family that was in the middle, children were being left with them. But then when they were going to Aboriginal families, the tool was saying, remove, remove, remove. And of course, so this thing ran as a topic, but of course their challenge was, well, it's not a tool that's paper-based, it's inside the computer. How do we grapple with this? Anyway, so I pitched to our board that actually this thing about data is, we're sort of illiterate about it. We don't do data, because why? Because we're sort of, we're people about words and meaning and identity and these things. Numbers don't help us with that. We always go into words and language and psychology or sociology or whatever it might be. But robo-debt is the example of where suddenly it becomes really real for our community. So here we've got a system that runs people of goodwill, inside the government, when this thing is doing damage to people. Even, if you read the robo-debt Royal Commission, you've got to read the first page. I have never read such a scoriating front page of that Royal Commission report that's out there. It is an amazing read. I shouldn't be so positive about it. I shouldn't be so positive about it. I guess my point is, in robo-debt, the data, it's not AI, but people are pulling data sets together and then saying, we're going to make an automated decision. We're going to send a letter and it's going to be on you to prove that you're innocent. We're not going to prove that you're guilty, and here's the fine. And so we had of course, this profoundly damaged whole group of disadvantaged people in our community, and the Royal Commission has really painted the damage that it's done. I guess what we're interested in is there's a group of people that have shown the way. So what AI is. So in that example, what we see is disadvantaged people are being further disadvantaged by data. The last step, I'll finish it, the last step is, what does artificial intelligence do? So what artificial intelligence does is it grabs really large data sets and then spots patterns. So here's a great place. I'll give you a great place where it's working really well. That's in the medical sciences. In spotting cancer treatments, in scans of your lungs, looking for lung cancer, it will spot these tiny patterns that the human eye won't find, and it is really improving our rates of, because it's got this predictive part of it. It can look at what you've got now and can cast forward and say, well, this is what's going to happen. It's one of the things that AI can do. It can write for you sentences. If you ask it to write you something, it's doing something that's going into the future. Well, in the US, there's a conversation running about, are we going to limit what AI gets used for? So there's a whole range of areas that are good, but I'll give you just one or two that are serious concerns. One would be the Americans, since the 1920s, there's been people over there, sociologists over there, who've been trying to predict rates of criminality. Will this child or adult become a criminal, and what does that look like? Well, let me tell you, the AI is going to be as effective at doing that as it is doing it already with medicine. There's no doubt those tools are going to work. Now, should we have a view about that? Of course, we do. And a lot of them, you might be surprised, there's a lot of American states who are saying, we don't want this technology. There's policing that will say, yeah, that'd be really good, we need that. Of course, if you turn it on here, it's going to say, oh, look at all the Aboriginal people, they're all criminals, right? Because there's these inherent biases in data sets, yeah? So, we could have a longer conversation. So one of the things that we're trying to do is the social sector isn't in the conversation about data, and that's because it's boring as batshit. Nobody wants to do numbers. We're all social people who want to talk about meaning and change and what's next for people, people's journey. But we're keen to be in this because we think the growth of data, the data that's being collected about us that we do and don't know, how it's being used and pulled together to predict your life insurance rates, or what insurance you'll pay into the future. The insurance industry is going, whoa, yeah, we need this is going to be fantastic. We can predict, and so there's some places you want to know, in some places. All right, I think we're at the mark now where I should change gears and just draw breath and come back to that first slide. Not that one, there we go. Who would like to kick us off? Comments? Comments, questions, where would we like to go? Yeah. Oh yeah, we've got a microphone, here we go.
Here it comes.
Yeah.
Peter, I'm interested in your sociological explanations as to what's happened with our agencies. What I find missing is any reference to how this links with the church, which obviously founded many of these things. And my own experience goes right back to before there was such a thing as United Care Australia, and to one of the first meetings of superintendents that sort of looked at whether we might even form that. And I'm very much aware that one of the reasons that was given for getting together in that way was not really sociological, it was political. And that was, we needed to get a stronger voice to influence the policymakers. But one of the things that seems to have been lost along the way for me is that agencies originally grew out of the Christian concern of religious leaders and individuals. And they were the philanthropists who even funded these things, because there was nothing there and there was no such thing as a government funding policy to draw on. And so it was the church seeking to express its Christian convictions that actually founded those organisations, and largely is reflected, I think, in what they still claim as their true values. But they seem to have lost the connection with the Christian church that they were founded on.
Yeah, I certainly agree with most of what you've said there. I think the metaphor I would use is the child was born, it grew up, and it hit its teens and 20s. It is now, we're in our 20s and 30s now, but they've left home. There's no doubt about that. And if I had this conversation with Morn, because someone said to me, well, when Morn was running, and the people in the congregation were saying, well, what can we do to bring it home? And I said, well, you think about how you talk to your teenagers or 20-year-olds around that. If you're going to do this command and control thing, we're not even going to be slightly interested. So I think these agencies that were born in a particular time are not what they are now. There's no doubt about that. Sorry?
I said that's right, I agree. My experiences can prove that, like you said, those predictive shit does not work. I have been a victim of the Department of Child Protection Services. They took my kid at birth, have lied about me in court papers. I don't have autism, I don't have brain damage, and I've raised my two girls well. I have a witness to my care of my kids right here.
I have gone through 9 cases of hell. I now suffer from PTSD. I don't know what the hell that is. I really know it's, however, problematic. I have sleep apnea. I have night terrors, continuous repetitive nightmares of these 3 women cold walking in saying, your son has been removed from hospital. I didn't even get to hold him. All on hearsay, all on what they think of my husband, and now I'm tarnished with the same shit brush. I'm sorry, but I'm very passionate. Sorry, I'm not picking on you, but this whole concept is bringing up demons.
Thanks, Mandy. We live in a complex world.
You mentioned that the AI thinks ahead, but Methodists are known for building, and public infrastructure has done more for public health than doctors, and we've got, I've lost count of the number of Uniting Church schools in the state. I don't think AI can predict those things. That comes from a different philosophy. And if I put my grandfather's communist hat on, he would say the churches are feathering their own nests by going this way. And I would be keen for the Uniting Church to go back to their build. And a lot of our great politicians have come from that background. Price, Veal. I think we also adopted Tom Playford. Where do we go with that with this AI? Because it won't build a new church for us. It won't build a new school. It won't build a new road. It won't build a port.
Yeah, I'm not proposing that. Maybe I haven't been clear, because the things they're quite disparate. This last thing is just a example of where the agency's worried about this thing's impact on disadvantaged people. We don't really, I don't see it as a way forward. We're just going, we looked around and went, is there anyone, the people who are starting AI, they're all engineers, they're all computer boffins, engineers, they're in business. Where's the social analysis and contribution to reining this thing in? So it's more about us trying to have influence over public policy rather than me proposing it a way forward in the future. I'm not proposing. It's us responding to. Well, the real pertinent example at the moment is a thing called Snug. If you need to rent a property, so my daughter had to rent the other day. When I last rented, I was 20 years old, and I had to get a statement from my employer about how much I earned. And that was a piece of paper, and I handed it to, and the landlord probably had 3 or 4 of these documents, 1-pagers with some material on it. Snug is the new AI way that this gets managed. So Snug says, I want 3 months of your bank statements. We want all of your transactions that you have used. And so it will drag this data and all sorts of data in, and it collects and keeps that data about you. So, and then it gives you a rating based on your, I don't know what it's based on. It's one of the things we're trying to work out. So I guess Snug is, now you don't go to a landlord, you pay $80 to put your information into an AI tool that then will say, your score's a bit low or high, you can spend an extra $40 to get it a bit higher if you want, and then the landlord gets a report based on numbers about you. And the data, what's going on with that data, how are they using it, who are they selling it to? And I suspect, this is Peter's guess, it's our social guess, is that tool will be, if I put my application in, I bet you I would do okay. But if I was a single woman who was in, or an Aboriginal person or someone from overseas, I bet you they get lower scores. And do you think does that have anything to do with a person's ability to rent a property and look after it and all the rest of it? It's gathering all this information that is fundamentally irrelevant to the renting thing. So I guess that's the, so we're interested in trying to limit the damage that AI does while saying, yeah, it's going to do some great stuff as well. It'll help other places. Any other questions? It's Fergus. If not, no, all good.
Thank you very much, Peter. Your mention of Kate Cox Baby Home brought back memories for me because I grew up at Brighton Methodist Church and that was just down the
Across the
road.
road.
Yeah. So that's interesting to see that put in context tonight. I'd like you to join me in thanking Peter for his presentation tonight. And Peter has prepared a little handout, which you're welcome to take. And
so I got published in Canberra Times, and I've done some. So we're going to do a mixture of journal articles and also writing from mainstream press. So that's the first go. The Department of Industry is looking at legislation around it. Yeah. Anyway, here we go.
Tell us that next week, David. It's the next slide, I think you'll find. If you click along to the next slide. Next week.
There it is. Our place in creation module.
okay.
Why is that on next week rather than the start of October, David?
I don't know. I didn't put the date on it.
Well, the reason is that at the start of October, when this fourth module in Our Place in Creation was scheduled, it suddenly bumped into the Polkinghorn oration, which was accidentally scheduled either the day before or on the very day. So that's the first Wednesday, I think, or is it a Friday in October, the Polkinghorn oration? No, it's Thursday. The Thursday. So this is the session brought forward now a month that's been bumped out by the oration. So it'll be Women's Perspective on Creation Care, Module 4 in Our Place in Creation. We've had the first few modules led by Jason John. There we go.
So this is the last of a series of presentations that we've organised with the Environmental Action Group, and thank you for that. All right, tea and coffee and a glass of wine, if you prefer, is available in the room behind. Thank you.